Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here, Scott. Scott, for everyone out there listening, please enlighten everybody a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Robbie. I'm a AI Institute, or I work at an AI Institute, and I am the lead of the machine learning projects that we do. Now, our institute's at a university, at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, but we're a little bit different than the average academic sort of group. We prioritize collaboration with industry, and we build concept demonstrators that industry then takes and runs with. So we kind of like research as a service. People have come to us with problems about, hey, look, we're not sure if AI can help us with X, Y, and Z. We go investigate, we build concept demonstrators, we give them some software and say, look, here's the results, here's something that works, and go and integrate it into your business. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy what I do.
So are we talking more like digital software style things, or are there capabilities of using AI more like physical machines as well too?
Yeah, predominantly we are just the digital space, but we do play a little bit in the robots and more hardware oriented focus, but typically the problems we are all digital.
Where do you see, I guess, the main area of focus where your type of research or your type of work is basically helping out or improving? Is it more like cybersecurity issues? Is it trying to find, I guess, maybe on like a budgeting standpoint where we're looking at finding ways to make a product more effectively, like in an assembly line or maybe a production aspect?
Yeah, the research is a little bit different than the project. So the client projects that we have are all driven by whatever the industry that the client comes from. So for example, we've had a manufacturer come to us, say, look, we've got this problem finding defects in wheels. We need to see if AI can scale our non-destructive testing processes. Whereas my research is more looking at the fail cases or the problems that have result from using AI and how we can fix them. So we want to try and make AI more robust and more available for more applications, basically.
Could you give me a couple examples of like some of the problems that AI, or at least project or problems that you face?
Yeah, one of the fundamental problems of using AI in an operation, let's take the defective wheels, is that the AI will fail and there'll be no indication that it's broken. So it will return a result and the user has no idea whether this is accurate or it's incorrect. And nearly the only way to sort of fix this is to manually inspect it, which kind of contradicts the purpose of using AI in the first place. So we're looking at methods and techniques to try and help people quickly and efficiently to inspect the instances where the AI may be incorrect.
Is it like, if you're giving me a percentage chance, what is the percentage chance that an AI would be incorrect? It seems like AI is would be a little bit more superior when it comes to human. Like, I know you need human to kind of maintain it, or at least if we're talking from a robotic standpoint, I guess is what I'm speaking from. You're looking at a human that can maintenance, like you can have one that can maintenance a whole army of robots. But if you have one programmer that's looking at a software that's developed for AI, I mean, how much is there a percentage of an AI doing a wrong decision? Because it seems like it's been more effective than not.
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I can answer in two parts. The first part is that usually only the successful cases of AI get the limelight, right? So there's many cases where AI is unsuitable. Anything to do with that class of problems where there's not a repeating pattern or there's a weak signal in the data. So AI is only as good as the data you give it. So in domains like manufacturing, where you can control pretty much every aspect of the manufacturing process, the lighting, the positioning, the color, everything about the environment, AI is very effective. In environments where there's high degree of change or a lot of dynamics where we have poor data or data is noisy, so it's incomplete or missing, AI is less effective. And in those situations, we need to have more, I guess, human in the loop processes where we can correct or fix where AI is falling over.
So with the data, who incorporates the data into the AI? Is it the business owner or I guess the information that you can really get from to the programmer?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, really. Often at the start of a project, what data that goes into the AI is what's available. So often the business owner will say, look, we've collected all this data, we think AI can be helpful. Then the challenges that we face then is that usually that data is not being collected for the AI task. So going back to the wheel prediction, right? We might have all these photos of wheels that are defective, but it's not being collected in a way that the AI can understand. So we now need to put something in place to collect new data, in which case the software engineers become much more involved in the data collection and process.
I would have to think that you would pick an unbiased party because if you have a corporation that is going to implement AI and they're like, give me your data for your guy's company or something like that. Use that as an example. They're only going to give you the good stuff about their company because they don't want the bad stuff to get out there. It's like, well, you're going to have an AI that's going to be ineffective, and we can tell. Like you could just see, like this AI is not fitting into the system. Maybe he calls you up on the cell phone and he's like, hey, this AI is not improving my company like you said it would. And you're like, well, the issue is you probably weren't honest with all the data. So there's probably things it's not able to account for because you haven't incorporated that in there. Like, did you do a scandal? Are you doing something like this? And then they start going, oh, yeah, there's this and there's this. And then you slowly start to see this thing correct itself and fix itself once you implement that data. I mean, you want independent software people to be able to install these things. You want people who are unbiased from the actual corporation because I mean, in the beginning when AI and all these automated cars were first taking off, and yeah, I'm just going to stay on automated cars because Tesla, for instance, when those Teslas were first rolling out, there were nothing but news reports about their crashes. Nothing, like it was an onslaught of just reporting about all the number of crashes and how dangerous this vehicle is. But our societal mindset has shifted to where now we're looking at this technology a lot more and we're using it a lot more, like our weapon systems and all these types of things, where you're starting to realize that we've gotten more comfortable with the idea of AI, which means we're going to incorporate it more into our life. And I mean, that brings up safety concerns, it brings up bigger issues, but it's easier to point the blame at an AI system because now they are controlling more of it than human error. Like if I sit there and knock Google, am I really hating the owner of Google? No, I'm kind of hating the web search engine and the algorithms that are installed and set into place. But that's a name without a face.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, I would counter and say like most of the challenges with AI and this are exactly the people who assemble them and put them together. Or maybe it's not the individuals, maybe it's the motivating drivers that put it together. In the search engine, for example, we know that that's designed to help people answer the queries that they've got, but we also know that there's, I guess, thousands of people behind it, fine tuning and gently correcting and nudging the system in the correct way. So one thing with these AI systems that's kind of hidden from, I guess, from view, is that no matter how good the AI is, somewhere in the creation or in the use of the AI, there's a large number of people that are doing either the labeling or the correction of the system. So the responsibility, although the manifestation might be completely automated, there is many people somewhere in the pipeline fixing it. And I guess in that case, you've got this issue of shared responsibility, which opens up a whole new avenue of other considerations.
So going down that avenue, for instance, what's your biggest concern with AI? Like my biggest concern is that not necessarily, I just think when you're creating something like this, it's kind of like a child and then it grows up. You got to hope that there isn't some type of interaction within that lifespan or in that timeline that hasn't influenced a bad decision to make a not really necessarily a bad person, but a bad kind of habit or type of moral obligation, I would say, to the world. And that's kind of with AI, for instance. Like, I'm not worried about someone hacking AI and changing it a certain way. But what I am starting to get severely concerned about is like, let's take websites, for instance, corporation influence. Now, business influence, that seems to be a lot of the world now. Like, for instance, if you type in AM on your computer, you're going to get Amazon top of the list. And then you're probably going to get a bunch of things that are just going to be a couple page results of Amazon, and that'll be for Google. But what stops that from corporations having business partnerships and things of that sort? And next thing you know, you get into this area where it's skewed completely into the bias of whoever that is controlling it. So, I mean, kind of like Facebook, for instance, the algorithm's a mini Mark Zuckerberg, I would say. But I mean, you just keep adding things and adding things and adding things, but it really skews it a certain way to where it starts to feel unfair. I mean, that's probably my biggest concern is just corporate influence and making sure that these things aren't just completely an unfair advantage. Because, like, if I'm going to start a bit, me and you are going to start a business. Next thing you know, we can't get into the game because it's already owned by everything.
Yeah, look, I think that's a legitimate concern. You framed the start of the question about what do I see as a concern. I mean, though all of those AIs in those big companies still built by teams of people. So as an academic where I'm training PhD students and some having some influence over the next generation, it's that I don't pass on the idea that, look, you might be only playing a small cog in a big wheel, but if you're building AI, you have a large, I guess, responsibility or impact on the potential systems. So it's not, it is faceless. There are faceless organizations like you're trying to say, but they're still made by groups of people that get trained by people like me. And we have certain responsibilities to try and encourage them to think broader, that just because you can doesn't mean you should, whatever that application may be. Um, and in terms of the competing against the big players, I mean, that's a very difficult problem. Regulation can play a role to hamstring some of these companies, but like kind of what Europe's been doing with the data privacy and making sure that AI algorithms have to be understandable to a certain level by people. And I guess it's still playing out how effective that'll be or what impact that'll have on the jurisdictions where it's put in place.
Do you see it taking off like the crypto game? Like, if you haven't started into crypto or if you haven't dived into that world yet, you probably aren't going to, just because it's been around for a little bit of a, I would say, kind of a long time in the grand aspect of where we take technology. I mean, past couple of years, crypto has been taking off and slowly getting bigger and bigger. I have friends that have so many crypto accounts where I'm like, I haven't even started the game, man. Like, I can't figure it out. Like, you got to put your email in, then your credit card, and I'm like, I can't do it. But there's people that are so ahead where I go, this is kind of like with AI, for instance. You don't want to be the last company to implement it, but necessarily do you want to be the first? I mean, next thing you know, you get it so good and you make your whole system running off an AI or something like that, then you're already ahead of the game. Everyone else is still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting phenomena because I mean, when AI first came out, it was all hot and everyone was using it, and everyone was building large data science teams and really ramping up. AI was going to change everything. And then over time, we started to see some reports come out where it's failing here. We've got fundamental bias problems. It's not delivering on the business value. And then we start to see it come down. But on the flip side, we see it ruthlessly effective in certain applications. Like you mentioned, Google search. You mentioned there's the Netflix recommendation algorithm that we probably all appreciate. And there's other applications as well. So it's kind of this situation when there's an industry or a problem domain where AI is explored, it might be very difficult to get through. It might take many years to work out how to make the AI work in that problem domain. But as soon as someone does, that person gets an advantage for a period of time, and it forces everyone else in the same industry to either adopt a similar technique or to use what's already been produced by that first player. And that's what we sort of try and help people with, I guess. They want to try and use AI early. Sometimes they think it's ready for what they want to do. Sometimes it's more, look, this is a long slog. This is not a tomorrow exercise. This might take several years, but when you do crack it, you've got that advantage like you alluded to before.
Where do you see AI in the next 5 years? Like, because the way I'm starting to think about it is like, it seems like once you understand the tricks, it's kind of like learning how to code. You don't necessarily need the ability to code, but definitely doesn't hurt you if you know how to. And then the people that learn it through that horrible process of learning how to code, once you learn it, you're like so good and you can create so many different things. I wonder if we can find a way in the next 5 years or so to make, like, maybe you have to get comfortable with an AI and get used to it. But imagine if there was an AI that was set out there to give every single beginner the chance to understand it and actually help out with more of a beginner's experience. Like, there's a lot of people that are still learning and maybe not so tech savvy, but imagine if you had an AI that's kind of like a tutorial in a video game, be able to assist you through all the steps of using it in the most beneficial way possible. So you don't just have to have experience in it. You can be a beginner and be at the same level.
Yeah, that'd be great to have, to see a range of tools come out that is kind of like Excel in terms of how widely used it is, how easy it is to get started, and how intuitive it is to start filling in details in the basic spreadsheet kind of format. If we had captured those elements for a tool where any sort of beginner could build some sort of AI and start to experiment and play with it, I think would see advances because we'll see new problem domains and applications attempted or tried that haven't been in the past. Now, I think there's probably going to have to be a few fundamental breakthroughs with how to maximize data beforehand, because data preparation is a major problem for these systems. But if that can be cracked and we can provide interface and intuitive approaches, I think that'll be a really fantastic thing for people. Because one of the challenges with AI is that when we introduce it somewhere, it does automate, and in some cases, it takes away certain manual work and human jobs and roles that were done possible. But what it also does is it creates a whole range of new opportunities, new positions, and new things that people can do with the AI. And I guess the difficulty that we observe is that the group of people that are, um, I guess, disadvantaged by the bringing in of this AI are not necessarily the same group of people that can then benefit and leverage the opportunities that it creates. And some of what you're touching on about new, easy to use is to help move this group across to the group that can leverage it and participate in the benefits that it brings.
But do you think that's just a generational thing? It seems like a lot of older generations, like I know people that still like to, mail in their stuff rather than submit an email. Like everything eventually has to just be like, we're not doing it this way anymore. We're going to transfer all to a newer age technology. And then they're kind of forced to learn. But a lot of people are more than willing to accept the same kind of lifestyle or exercise that they've been doing over and over and over again because they're used to it. They don't want to learn something new, especially with older generations. But you're having kids come up now that are digitally native. This is what kind of like, I mean, it goes down a deeper rabbit hole that we can go down to if you're interested in the sci-fi aspect of things, which is digital life. I mean, living in a digital world, for instance, like, they're creating artificial villages, they're creating all these types of things. I'm not just talking about on your computer. I'm talking about like artificial trees, not like the plastic ones or something like that, but like actual like nanotechnology type stuff. Like I said, it gets down a science rabbit hole where I'm like, holy crap, I don't think I can handle that. Let me back it up to just using Google correctly. But when you're looking at the generational gap, if we talk about that, for instance, I mean, you're going to have a lot of newer, younger kids, for instance, that are going to be coming up, and it's going to be very, very difficult, like you were saying in the beginning, to steer the course of in I guess instilling proper ethics, showing them that you want to use this in the right way. I think when we talk about security risks or we talk about issues, for instance, it's really good to build up a website for yourself, using an AI to be able to help out your business in the most effective way. But one thing that we do know is that sometimes people tend not to be the best of people, and they try and look at ways for data, using data, selling it or stealing it or taking it, which become ethical concerns. Now, I wonder if there's a way to be able to trace, not like someone hacking a phone or something like that, but just so you can make sure that the person who is performing this act or who has constructed this AI or added onto it, that code number has a tracking device thing on it or a label, much like a serial code, where you can make sure that that software or that programmer, whoever added in that thing that is deemed unethical or whatever, can be traced. I mean, it's a real thing. Like we can sit here and like talk about hypotheticals and all this, but that's a real issue. Is that a lot of this stuff when you're talking about an AI, you're talking about bots, for instance, they play a big importance. They play overall improvement to a lot of people's lives and a great way to get effective business strategies out there for marketing purposes. But if you look at the more personal aspect of things, people being, incentivized by bots to have fights or, steer up anger or these types of social situations. If you had a tracking code or a label that was encoded into that AI that just happens when somebody's programming something, then you could find that software person, talk to them, and figure out, were they the cause of this corruption or was it somebody else that added a code inside of it? Because the more you see this technology progress, is kind of like my whole point here, is that you're going to see bigger restrictions start to hit down. And I'm just making sure that there's a good, at least people are thinking about these unethical decisions that are coming up. I mean, it's been trending all over, like Twitter, Facebook, whatever, about all these algorithms that are incentivizing violence. Now, is it the algorithm's fault? No, but somebody's got to be responsible in a world where someone has to be accountable. We need that enemy. We need that one person that's going to pay the price for the dirty act. And I think that really deters people from getting interested in artificial intelligence or AI.
Yeah, I think in the case of the social media case that's come up a couple of times, I mean, the responsibility is really with the platform. I mean, it's not the creators of the content on their systems that are building those AI. It's employees of the company. So they, like in my view, they should really be um, accountable for what they're perpetuating and what they're circulating in their own platforms. They can argue, yes, we didn't create it, but you're amplifying it, you're magnifying it, you're giving it a loud voice when it had a tiny voice. So that is an aspect of that. There's the other issue too of, well, who is the global police force for all of these systems? I mean, at any point you have a regulator or a position of, hey, look, we'll check this. There's probably someone who can benefit from doing the opposite, which I guess is part of what's caused the problem. Like advertising is the classic. We may all want to have more private data, but there's people willing to pay for our stuff to be able to flash ads in front of us more effectively. So if there's a price, then someone's going to provide that service, which the big tech companies quite happily do.
Do you think that advertising or AI should be used for advertising?
Oh, I'm not a fan. I'm personally skeptical of
I
online
like that.
advertising.
That's good thinking.
Um,
Skeptical.
I mean, I take a sample of one myself, so it's not thorough, but I can't retrace any purchase I've made to online advertising now, albeit I do block ads where I can. But I wonder how many purchases people make that are directly influenced by advertising. There has been some reports come out where some companies have stopped their advertising online because they haven't seen the benefit. I'd want to see the evidence of why people do it. Now, I know brand reputation and awareness and putting it in front of eyeballs has some benefit, but direct revenue, it'd be interesting to see more information about that. I
Well,
can presume that people can do it, so it
it's
must be valuable to them.
it's kind of like Facebook. Like Facebook, Instagram, they allow you to be able to promote your services, and then this algorithm or whatever is able to curate the, depending on what you filter the results as, to be able to promote it to the people that you want to target. But the issue starts to become, are they real people that are doing those types of things? Are they just accounts? Like Facebook, for instance, there was a scandal about it where they were taking people's inactive accounts or accounts they thought they deleting all friends off of it. So the profile doesn't pop up like on a normal search, but it's a bot that runs that account now. So next thing you know, this one bot can control like 50 different accounts and is able to just like your page. So you get 50 likes. It's like, holy crap, the money's working. So you're paying more and more and more to get more likes for your page, but they're not real people. You'll never see an interaction, and you never even see them say, when it says people reached, you'll still have that one or two that are friends of yours that like your page, but they don't actually. So I mean, it's weird because you can use that to your advantage if you're willing to put in the money. If you get 1,000 something likes on your Facebook page, the weird part about people is whenever we see someone with a massive following, we just get this inherent need to follow them. Like, it's like, oh, this person must be famous, I don't want to be the last person. It's much like being involved in like the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or any of those types of games. So it's like, you got to look at the weight of risk. And I know you have to think about this. Are you more worried about people making unethical decisions with AI or people using it to a really bad route? Or are you more worried about that people aren't respecting the course of action that AI really should be on? Like, because I just look at everything getting hijacked because that human experience, that human error that everyone goes, oh, that was because of human error. Yeah, but what is that? Like, is that just someone that didn't get enough hugs as a kid? Like, you got to really like worry about it because the general public is going to have that interaction. Then everyone hates Zuckerberg, but like, is it Zuckerberg or do you hate the algorithm? Well, I hate the algorithm. Well, it's Zuckerberg's algorithm. It's like everybody's pointing at each other. I'm like, hang on a second, we need to find somebody.
Yeah, look, I think I think part of this is the fact that, I mean, people do what people do, right? It doesn't matter whether you, well, whatever you set up, whatever system or tools or games or whatever you do, there's always going to be a portion of people that take it somewhere that other people disagree with. And the thing with technology is that it just amplifies all of our, I guess, best and worst fears. I mean, if I if I'm on social media scrolling through something and I start to click and read through certain articles, I'll be bombarded with that theme of article for the next however long, because the algorithm picks up and thinks that that's what I want to read and that's what I want to follow. Classic example of that is when you need to shop for something, and then after you've bought, like, you start searching for a fridge, you buy the fridge, and then you get fridges recommended to you on whatever social platform you're on for ages afterwards. And that's a fairly innocent example. But if you have a relationship and, I don't know, perhaps someone dies or you separate, then you start to get reminders about upcoming events that perhaps aren't so favorable.
Well, what about an algorithm that curates a person's more than just a personal experience, but a person's thoughts? Like being able to curb your decision making. Like they talked about it, like for like the Capitol Hill riot, that it might have incentivized violence. Facebook did, but I'm not even looking at that. We look at advertising as like, oh, maybe we're getting some advertisement purchases because of this algorithm showing advertisements to other people. What happens to a kid that just stumbles across, maybe he's reading an article about JFK. Let's take my instance. I'm reading an article about JFK and they keep recommending me more reads and more recommended searches like this. Next thing I know, I become a historian in JFK. Did I want to be a historian of JFK, or did I just come across a bunch of history and a bunch of feed that just had me go down this pathway? I mean, how many people now are actually thinking about what they're consciously doing 24/7? A lot of people aren't. Like I said, the routines, people have the routines, they get used to it. You start wondering, like, if you could put like instead of like a drink or a Coke or a Pepsi in front of somebody, you just put a pacifier. Would they just put it in their mouth because instinctually that's just, they're just processing life? And this is kind of like my fear of like the digital world, is that like we are so used to this type of thinking where you see some of these people that play video games all day long and they just seem like they're on autopilot, like they're not really there. Like you're having a conversation like, it's like you're not paying attention. I mean, eventually somebody's researching, a kid in school or something is doing a project or something like that. Maybe they're focused on the topic, but they're kind of just half-assing it, I would say. Next thing you know, they have this algorithm that starts showing them a bunch of things and they go to college, they go to do like, let's do the best examples. They go to college, they get a 401k, whatever. But then they're miserable because they're like, I really just kind of went with life. Like I let life toss things at me. And that's another issue. How many people do you know? I can't even count on my hands. I know so many people that go, the universe provides. The universe is the algorithm, bro. The universe showed you that thing. That's what I'm saying, is like they sit there and go, well, this message just came across my thing. Did it? Did someone, are there really singles in your area that are 18 years old and they want to meet you? Is that true? Is that true? No, it's not. But people are accepting things now at this idea that the universe will place something in front of you. If you will it, it will be so. Okay, so if I will, me and you talking about IHOP, for instance, am I going to get an advertisement for IHOP? Is that the universe, or is that just a machine that's listening to my conversations? I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like this, what you're talking about before about programming, is that now AI is programming us. I mean, I was at the traffic lights the other day and I'm just watching two kids out of primary school and probably high school as well cross the street. both head over looking at the phone. Like they wouldn't have been able to see more than 2 feet in front of their toes. Um, they're programmed to do that. I mean, I'm sure it was entertaining or interesting, whatever it was, but we've got whole generations, like you mentioned before. Not only are they digital native, but we've got these algorithms heavily influencing what they consume, when they consume it, what they think about themselves. If they're on social media, what they think other people think, and what other people are like. It's this whole artificial world that's not reflective of the reality they live in many ways.
Is that does
And
that be
that should be
I mean,
concerning.
does that become beneficial or does that become like a big hindrance on society? For instance, if you take a 14-year-old kid now and ask them to go inside and pay for gas or pay for something, a lot of them, their speech skills aren't really as good as they probably were before technology was invented. That was because you don't have really a need to. Now everything's Apple Pay, it's some type of form of digital payment. And I know whenever I talk about this, I've talked to people that are like, that's all sci-fi, it's all fantasy, it's all make believe, like TV stuff. I'm like, it's not really though. Like if you really jump down the rabbit hole of biotechnology and nanotechnology, you start to realize that we're far more advanced than we like to think we are. I mean, take AI, for instance. That's an advanced, complicated system. That is something that in a sense, we say artificial intelligence. You don't deem something intelligence unless it has something of value. And that's kind of where we're at. It's like, yeah, can we use it for marketing purposes? That's where I'd like to see it implemented. I would like to see a little bit more of a personal cutoff when it comes to how it's incorporated into everybody's life. But if we let it be consumed by the marketing aspect, we have to be very, very careful because then that allows no personal interaction. That allows no system that's safe for people's own experience. And we only allow it for corporations to influence it, much like a lot of things in this world are corporate influenced.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying there. I mean, I'd like to be able to have an AI where it fights back. I want to be able to watch YouTube without getting 50 ads in the middle. Sure, yeah, I can pay for it, but there's other sites where I just bombarded with things. I'd like to be able to have interaction where I know that my children, as they grow up, they can use software safely, and that they're not going to be bombarded by constant things all the time about trying to manipulate what they think, what they feel. There's a real need for disconnecting. I think there's work out there that shows you have a disconnect 1 day a week or turn off at times. I think there's real value in that. There's plenty of enjoyable circumstances and lessons to be taken from the world that we live in.
Well, how far away are we from implementing it in educational purposes? Like, just
Yeah,
grab my
yeah.
hand.
Education is a good one. Yeah, education's a good one. We've worked on this to try and help uh, direct resources to students. Actually, try and find the resources that are most effective for individual people to help them learn and progress. And it raises the same concerns that we talked about before, which is like, do they want to learn this, or are we using an algorithm to sort of prompt them and push them in a particular direction?
But that answer gets fixed with the idea that we can make an AI system that can also be bought and owned by like a parent, for instance, that can control the regulation and control how the AI forms the opinion of their kid, for instance. So instead of like worrying about like teaching your kids certain things, you had an AI do it for you. But now you have a more personal home one. So instead of working on like a system like we incorporated in a school, maybe that's where it starts. But imagine incorporating it like a family could own one. Like you for instance, if you have kids, you could show your kid this algorithm, this AI system or whatever, but it would only be curating information or it would only be gathering information that you feel like your kid would be best to learn. Now, the bad side of that is if you get an asshole that's just like, I want to teach my kid all about the political elites, like I probably would, but that's a danger. But you would honestly, I think any parent who's rational in their understanding of what life is, and I mean, I know we say people aren't really rational, but nobody wants their kid to be an idiot. So you're going to want to curate the best information. Like I want science, I want mathematics, I want all these things to make sure that you can actually excel in life because no parent wants to see their kid fail. And I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Sorry, I was just adding on that. It's like yeah, on one hand, you do want to have that sort of interaction with AI to be able to coach it into what to do. But there's also an element of exposure to things that you perhaps wouldn't have thought of. One of the good things about going to school is that you get a range of subjects that are different for everyone. Like rarely does anyone come out and say, "Look, I love every single subject I tried at school." So if in the world that you're imagining or that we're discussing, like we'd want to be able to have this, look, I know you've said you want to have these 5 characteristics, but have you considered geography? There's this really great aspect of geography that doesn't seem to be aligned with your interests. It's outside of the world of what you're thinking about, but it lets you explore and try things that are beyond. Otherwise, you end up with the reinforcing, like you touched on before, a narrow view. It's like I only know so much, and that's what I'm going to pass on.
Well, I mean, even if we don't talk about like replace, here's the ethical concern I would say is that we have a lot of parents that are not really willing to put their kids in school anymore. We have a lot more homeschooling, at least the homeschooling numbers have gone up, not just because of the pandemic, because of other factors in there as well too. Honestly, I think the fix to that would just be have a recording or have some type of device where parents can call in and hear what the teacher is teaching to their kids. So you can have this more comfortability thing of like, okay, they're not learning crazy stuff. They're learning this, but it became an issue. There was an article about it where a teacher was instilling their own political views into their students. Now their students were in high school, and the dad comes home, and the kid's talking about NATO and all these things. He said, "What the fuck? Why are you talking about NATO? Like, why you need to learn about the nat? What? It doesn't make sense." And then you start realizing that this teacher like was just so like skewed towards this information, or maybe it was just on their mind and decided to talk about it with their students. I mean, I've gotten into a conversation in class before where we're talking about like the Garden of Eden, the snake. Did it have vocal cords? Why the hell are we talking about that in a history class? It doesn't make sense. Like does a snake have vocal cords? Like how does it able to talk? It's a really strong question. You can make a really good argument about that, but that should have never been in that class where we do talk about maybe this more personal interaction between teachers and classes, for instance. But there's also a regulatory aspect that I feel like a lot of kids go to school, and besides maybe a teacher having a hangover and turning on a TV or a movie or something like that, you have more of this artificial system or this thing that's able to give the general public or the general thing in this area this crucial information about stuff too, and might actually take out the more personal influence of knowledge. How many teachers have avoided saying something to a student because they only like the other side of things? I mean, that's why you have movements spark up about critical race theory and all these types of things, and a lot of teachers that are against that and a lot of teachers that are for it. It's going to judge on the teacher, but imagine if you had a system that just told you straight, that just gave it to you. I mean, that's a good educational aspect. And then everyone could have their own personal home one where you could use it to your benefit. You know, a parent curates the TV channels that you can watch. Parent curates the artificial intelligence. I just want you to strictly learn life stuff. I want you to learn about this, and then you can go to school and get the information that way. I mean, it's a dreamscape scenario, but we got to look at like what's going to happen in 5 years. I have no clue, man. I mean, you're involved in the work, you're involved in the technology on this aspect. You see it advance. Probably 5 years ago, you wouldn't expect where it's at now. So let's think what 5 years from now is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite different. That's clear. There's many applications. One thing that I would really like to see it push. You've talked about AI for the education thing, but it'd be really great to see AI in the medicine and in the hospitals more, resolving some of the fundamental challenges that we face there. I mean, there's many diseases that we don't have cures for. They're in the hospitals, they're constantly trying to optimize the treatments they give for every individual person that comes in. Some sort of system that can learn how I'd react to certain treatments, to be able to try out different courses of action on the diseases that I may have or the condition that I have. And then without having to do this trial and error kind of approach. I mean, even decision support systems in there where clinicians are guided by an AI on what's actually going wrong with this individual, what's most likely the cause, how can I help them with it, what's going to help them, I guess, heal and recover the quickest or the most efficient, that takes in all the data that we've got of across the hospital systems across the world and just tailors the treatment for people. I mean, that would be significant, an improvement.
That's interesting that you take the more medicine route, because I always take the more space route with AI. I've talked to someone who uses a program simulation that's curated by AI data that just literally tries to recreate the Big Bang, and they're constantly funneling new data, like they threw dark matter in, or whatever, this other types of things that now we're now discovering and trying to recreate what was before the Big Bang. And everyone says, well, there's nothing. Well, there something came to something. It didn't just miraculously pop up. There was some type of interaction that they're trying to figure out. See, the medicine thing, that's one I don't ever see being, using AI for some things. Like I could see basic technology stuff, but when it comes to curing diseases, I mean, do you expect that people could put down the profit aspect of things? Like I know me and you were thinking like, yeah, let's cure cancer. But I mean, that's a money market, man. You start realizing how corrupting money is. I just don't put, I'm not a pessimist when it comes to people's personal experiences. I think I'm a good person. You're a good person. I think there's a lot of good people out there. But when you're getting your billions of dollars and you're swimming in champagne and caviar, like it's very, very difficult to be like, I want to cure cancer, because that's going to skew the flow of your money.
Yeah, look, if you're worried about the influence of where people are going to use it, you're always going to have to deal with the politics, the other motivators, and the dollars. And that's in every discipline. I mean, we've got renewable energies coming up as a big thing that we have to deal with. But it's going to get pushed back. We're going to have many, many people and large countries and companies try and squash electric vehicles, try and push that back for the same reason. So, I mean, I think AI is going to be no different than any other technology. It's going to have its successes, it's going to have its failures, it's going to have people try and tear it down, and it'll be dependent on the application. You're spot on. Medical will have hurdles to get over, but then again, those same companies may benefit. You'll be able to design new drugs, you'll be able to design more effective treatments. Someone's got to manufacture those, and they still have to roll them out to people. So there's still a place for the current players.
Well, even if we talk about like, because even if we're bringing up like the dangers of like just the money manipulation aspect that comes in with like business and trying to incorporate it into the medical side, but we incorporate it into the digital side when it comes to our experience of what we see every single day. Like a lot of people, more often than not, the general public's not going to the hospital or something like that. There's a lot of people that aren't like ill, and they probably don't get ill for a while. But we have this aspect now where we have a device that we come in contact with AI every single day. The average person does. You come in contact with, it makes me question the Sims. Like, how the hell did that everyone able to do and live their life? They're not controlled by anybody. They're just regular, this thing that just the game's running itself. And it's kind of like this system where it's like, if this is possible, it can be brought to a bigger scale. Or I start wondering, how long until we have AI or algorithms that could just curate like the news? Like, I mean, you're expecting the facilities or the networks to be able to put honest data into it, but imagine if you had like a restriction access where it was based in something. I don't know. See, that's the hard part, is like who's deemed perfect or worthy enough, like lifting Thor's hammer, to program the algorithm properly or program the AI properly. You got to have some person who's won the Nobel Peace Prize like 10 times.
Yeah, and even then you're going to find failures with it. You're going to find some competing group somewhere that wants to have an AI that does something different. And if they don't have one, then they'll build it, and that'll be it. We'll be continuously, it's kind of like the cybersecurity problem we've got now, right? We come up with a way to detect these attacks, and then the attackers find a way to get around it. And then we solve that one with some new technique, and then they come back with something else. It's just a forever kind of problem. I think a lot of the challenges we're going to have with AI are around the humans. You fix the humans and you'll fix the AI. All the time that we've got flawed humans, we're going to have flawed AI.
That's like a that's a statement right there. If we fix the humans, Mostly because I don't know how that even gets started. Everyone's so like it's that personal experience that everyone has in their life where it makes them completely unique compared to somebody else. Like you might agree on some basic topics and stuff like that, but when it boils down to the individual thought process, I wonder if you can get an AI that can create another AI, like an AI that's created by someone has its views curated or has its decisions kind of based in what that person that who created it was. But imagine if you had an AI system that was taught to think differently, adversely from the way that you thought of it. Like if you had two AI systems, like a good and bad, not saying like the bad, but one that looked at humanity in the best of lights, like trying to find improvements to fix its life. Then you had one that always knew what the in the like how I think, like the way that people are going to use this technology for the worst possible thing. If you had these two systems create their own system, then you don't have any personal influence. Like if I was going to create an AI system, I would put in every single opposite choice of what I would take. Like you have a census test, or you played Fallout, right?
No, I haven't played
Oh,
Fallout. I know what it is though.
but you make decisions. It's like Skyrim. You make decisions and choices, and those choices kind of correct your path and make all this. Now, there's a limited number of choices, but imagine if you could implement as many choices as possible, and then you just had a wide array of a lot of people taking a census test, like 30,000, 100,000, whatever you want to say, all from varying different countries that are able to curate the choices and the information that goes into this AI. So at least it's aware of this. So you might not have one that fits for every individual person, but a good start is that you have one that fits the general basis. We have those now. But imagine if it can get to a deeper scale where we can actually not really worry about the necessary harmful effects. We can more worry about the positive effects of it. Renewable energies is, as much as we say that's where it's going to go, I don't know, because it's very, very difficult because there's everyone coming at it from a different angle. Now, we all have the same goal for renewable energies, is about finding a source that we can all use sustainably without killing the earth. But which one's right? Is it the solar guy? Is it the guy with wind stapled on his chest? Is it the water dude? I have no clue, but everyone's going towards the same goal. Their path is the only correct path, where you start to wonder, like, could I just implement all your voices in one machine?
Yep, I think simulation will play a big role in this, right? Because now we can play out and see which one of these looks the most promising given the environment that we decide to play around with. But yeah, it's going to be difficult, definitely.
And it's crazy because we could talk about renewables, but the one that I see most advancing with AI is autonomous vehicles. Like, oh, who develops that software and who's the person that's going to be able to regulate it? Like, is that going to be government? Like, because I know laws come out once this stuff, like, we just slowly start to adapt with how this technology goes. And then you'll see laws and you'll see rules and regulations passed upon it. But what rules and regulations is okay? Like, that's the thing, is that it's constantly changing. And then, like, it does leak back into politics, which really sucks because you could see this take off in a huge direction. Like, imagine if we incorporated this in farming using AI or using some type of thing that's able to, be able to figure out the best possible way to harvest a crop or be able to grow a certain amount of produce with the maximum amount of benefit. I mean, you would save time, you would save a lot of extra resources that get spent out as well too. I mean, even with genetic engineering, that's a medical one we could dive down. That's a huge one. Not even just with crops, but engineering when it comes to our genetics of people, like an algorithm that's or an AI that's being able to detect anomalies before a person that might miss them. Like you have one person curate over it. Then you have an algorithm or an AI come up right behind them, like, hold on, you missed this one, you missed this one, you missed this one. The next thing you know, you're having, I mean, people would say that's eugenics. Not really. I mean, if you're just having normal, like basic anomalies taken out, how many kids are born with like a defect? How many kids are born with some type of syndrome or some type of thing that might hinder into their life? I mean, you would be able to completely eliminate that.
Yeah, I mean, from where I sit, I deal with a lot of the shortcomings of ML and AI. I'd be very hesitant to try any of that from where I sit.
Yeah, you're shown all that bad stuff. You probably think differently.
Yeah, I've seen the other side of the coin. I'm not sold by the AI marketing brochures just yet. I think it's exciting. I think it'll be great once it starts to be leveraged by more people. but I'm not going to get in a self-driving AI focused car for a long time, especially not one that's been trained in the States and has never seen a kangaroo before.
Oh yeah, that's like or a koala bear just walking across the road like it's a normal thing.
Yeah, absolutely not. There'll be all kinds of problems that we'll have over here.
Do you think that the best experience to make a really good true AI is to get a lot of information from not just one specific source, but multiple different sources? Like, I know, like, we talk about countries, for instance. Like, I mean, if you had a United Nations type AI, one that had curated information without all the personal preferences that each leader or each whoever representative has in their head, but you're going off the basis of information of what that country's largest issues are and what those most promising aspects of that country, you would probably have a really strong base for a good foundation to be able to add on and look differently into things.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend where the consensus is. I mean, if you in the UN, you don't get uniformity in agreement. So you might end up having a lot of resolution that's pretty anti certain countries at the moment. So this issue of bias creeps up wherever you've got people and aggregating. So multiple sources can help mitigate a course, but often you can pick the sources that will have a particular bias.
When wait, hold on. So it like if it had a particular bias though, if it was regulated by something else, like imagine if we just went to a country and picked each individual person who's like donates to charities and stuff. Not like each every individual person, I should say. One particular person, like we all know, like who's a very like not a Bill Gates. I wouldn't, he's not nice, but pick someone who's like Gandhi, like a Gandhi of each country, who's only worried about like the promising aspects and then not so worried about the own personal aspects. I think if you're looking at a leader or an ambassador of a country like the UN, that is a big issue of like what countries do not like each other or what countries do we even deem a country. Like that's the thing is like Taiwan is not recognized by China. So you would get into this aspect of like, all right, we got to get the politics out of it. So let's just look at people that, what's your overall goal? I want to make money. You're out. Okay, what's your goal? I want to feed people. That's a good goal. Let's put you in the machine.
So now you got the bias of the selector to deal with.
Damn.
So whoever's selecting those people is where it comes in. So it's like turtles all the way down. Wherever whatever rule or rubric you use to try and find good data, you're going to introduce some version of bias. I think the point is though is that at least be open about it. Let's surface it up. Let's say, okay, yep, AI is not perfect in many situations, but let's communicate what the limitations are. What are the biases that are in these processes, and then let the end users determine whether they want to function with that or avoid it.
Do you think that the general like for instance, like if we bring it back to what we mentioned in the beginning about like people and their jobs, do you think that it could be eventually something where people are going to lose a lot of jobs because of AI?
No, I don't think so. I think you'll see the transition. You'll see some people having to learn and upskill, but I think that it's going to be a gradual process that comes in. Like you touched on before with the generation gaps briefly, is that some people will not gravitate towards the AI. They'd rather hold off and not embrace it. Whereas the next generations are going to be all over it and they're going to be pulling it in, and it'll be more of a push-based approach to leveraging AI. So you'll see it gradually change. And as our understanding of how to use these systems, how to deal with some of the challenges we spoke about, like bias and fairness, and how to deal with some of these challenges, it'll become more widespread and more adapted. And we'll just get more comfortable with this type of technology. And look how easy it is to use Siri. I mean, that's sophisticated techniques behind that. But people, my parents and other people who are much older than I am can leverage it. Like talking to your phone is relatively normal, surprisingly.
The reason why I asked that is because you mentioned before about being like kind of more involved in like the errors and the issues that kind of come up with this type of technology. Um, I think from you saying that, it really makes a lot of people more comfortable with the aspect of AI, knowing that it's not going to just take away all jobs It's just going to be something that we're just going to have to get used to when it comes to, you'll probably see some drop off with a couple of people, but I mean, generally the same, we're going to use it to our benefit at our jobs. Um, what are some, like, for instance, like with the news and with the reporting and information that gets written down about the data of AI technology, is a lot of it very transparent? Like, is there honesty that's being involved in that? Or do you see like there are some issues where you're kind of wondering, like, why isn't this incorporated into the report? Like, this is kind of crucial. I think the public should know about.
Yeah, there are some efforts from some of the large tech companies to formalize how they communicate about AI and what it's been done. Like what's the bias behind it? How have these things been created? But there's the problem with this is that there's much of AI that's hidden, that's subtle, little features, little behaviors here, tweaking this, influencing that, that manifest to users in different ways, but they're hidden quite a way away from the forefront. And we're just not going to have the um, insight into those systems or how they're done or what the motivations are. Bit like we talked about before about large tech companies, there's profits to be made, there's corporate secrets to be had, there's other agendas to keep this out. I think generally getting the public to talk more and question some of these things, like if something's free and you're using it, you got to think about where the money's coming from. So if social media, you're not paying for it, then you're the product and you're going to be sold somehow to someone else, or your data is. And then you're going to be encouraged to look at certain content on products or articles or steal your attention. Basically, they want your attention. And you want to ask either yourself, is that where I want to put my attention? Is that what I want to spend my energy and effort on? Or am I happy to hand it over to someone else and say, no, I enjoy the interaction, the communications, and the benefits from this system. I'll accept that they're going to take my attention spans away from things that are in this world and around me.
I think people look at that as a fair bargain, but I don't think it's fair because all they have to do is make the technology more fun. And especially in a time when people are going through tremendous crisis a lot, life crises or just world crises. Like, there are so many people that are worried about problems that aren't even happening in their own country, which is good to have a general sense of empathy for people, but they're so worried about it where it's destroying their lives. You know what I mean? And I necessarily don't want to be like, oh, don't worry about that. But at the same time, like, you don't need to be worrying about a nuclear destruction happening. Like, I've talked to so many people. Do you think it's going to, I'm like, why the, what? You work at a Dunkin' Donuts, just serve up the coffee and shut up. Like, it's something like that. But I get their concerns. It's just, I think a lot of people have an unrealistic expectation of fear. And I think it's because fear is a main motivator in a lot of aspects when it comes to business. People taking decisions or making things that aren't really necessarily the best interest of a lot of maybe their own company or maybe themselves. And I wonder, like, how many people are like, for me, I post and ghost off social media. So like my data, I rarely use it. But if I'm on an internet or I'm using something to research something and they ask to track cookies and something like that, I mean, at that point, the keys are in their hands. I'm just kind of the vessel that's getting used in a sense. So if they make it more fun, more appealing for kids to be on the internet, I mean, it's kind of an unfair bargain.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some of the stuff we talked about, parent controls and more of this AI fighting back and being aware of this, I think is the approach. I mean, does everyone know that this is the bargain that you're making and that you're losing this trade-off? I mean, another thing in some of the work that we do for the creative pursuits where you've got to produce content, whether it be podcasts like this, whether it be books, whether it be artwork or whatever it is that people are interested in producing, they're probably not spending hours and hours on social media. I think there's probably separating out, and I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but I'd imagine that more time in creative pursuits and producing content can probably show a benefit of that. It's difficult. I think it's going to be, there's a whole range of knowledge that we're going to gain in and around not only how to use AI, but the impacts it has. How do these subtle algorithms change the way we think, change the way we learn? change our emotional responses to things that happen away from the digital environment. Um, you just see these different things.
Well, even how recognizable is the change going to be in 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I mean, we notice the change now. I know people can say, well, we notice the change. We can see people getting lazier. We can see people more accepting to this type of thing. It's like, yeah, but then eventually we're going to use this as our base level. Then we're not going to remember what it was like 5 years ago. Like, I don't remember what it was like to not have social media ever. And I was born before social media. So it's like you get to this aspect, like, I don't remember that. Like a lot of people probably don't. Then you get into this other land where what's it going to be 10 years from now when artificial intelligence takes something or we adapt to something and we don't remember what it was like before that. It's that getting used to thing where you just start realizing that that's going to start curving so much about people's experience in life, which it might be good, it might be bad. I see a lot of upside with AI, but also if we don't talk about the unethical risks or we don't talk about a lot of the issues and making sure that the power doesn't trace hands to advertising as much as it is already, I mean, it can only get worse in a sense. I mean, I don't necessarily think that there should be giant restrictions and rules, but I also think that we can't eliminate the personal conscience of just being aware of that this is a device and it doesn't control your whole life. It doesn't control your whole childhood. It doesn't control your whole system of being in a positive direction in anything. I mean, business, for instance, it's been a major benefit to use technology for business. Honestly, you probably can't really succeed if you don't. But people are looking at it like I have to spend as much money as possible into this technology to make sure that my business is going to constantly be promoted. It's like podcasts. It's a major platformer for podcasts. Is invest your money in the technology that'll promote your podcast out there. Mine's spreading out word of mouth. I'm doing pretty damn well. So I'm just saying, like, it's hard to really recognize that because everyone's on a time crunch. And that time crunch means you need to be doing this 1 minute, this another minute, this another minute, or you're out of the game. And people feel like they need to be involved in technology. They need to be messaging every single person with their mixtape and making sure that they listen to it to get their stardom out there. When really, are they curating a large amount of audience? But how much is the return? What's the return on that? Are you getting loyal people?
Yep. And the impact of many of these decisions isn't known until after the technology's been out, because the rate of technology comes out far faster and more frequent than we can regulate or understand all the impacts. And as with a lot of things, it's partially beneficial and it's partly not. And we obviously want to cap the downside and exploit the upside as best we can. So it's going to be an interesting future, that's for sure.
It's a good thing to end on. Interesting future. But Scott, where can people find you, man? Any of your links?
Yeah, I might send through some. Best to follow me at the AI Institute. There'll be a blog up there that you'll be able to keep track of some of the stuff we're doing and much more on the applied and dealing with some of the challenges of AI. But we're hopefully going to help build some of the exciting things that we spoke about today.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I link it all in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.